Hello and welcome to European UFOs. My name is Sebastian, and if you like this episode, then please leave a review on your chosen platform. It really helps with the algorithm. Also, if you want to contribute to this podcast staying ad-free for listeners, then please go to buymeacoffee.com, where literally for less than the price of a coffee, you can help me keep the show up and running ad-free. So please do support the podcast if you feel it's worthwhile. In today's episode, we enter the difficult but fascinating terrain of UFO history. Over the last 70 years or so, UFOs have received many different meanings from different groups, each with their own agenda. For some, UFOs and their occupants have become a new religion. For others, they are a thought experiment in physics with little impact on society at large. Add to this the often conflicting statements of governments from across the world, and you have something that's perfectly confusing and fascinating at the same time. My guest today, Ignacio Cabria, is an esteemed expert on the social history of UFOs in Spain and has written extensively on the historical complexities surrounding UFOs in that country. From esoteric contactee movements to more or less formalized research groups, Spanish ufology has had many drivers, each with their own sets of ideas and beliefs. Essentially, the question we explore in today's episode is one that deserves way more attention if ufology is to be saved from its own acrimonious tendencies. How do we, based on our place in society, construct, appreciate, and ultimately determine what UFOs mean? Hello, Ignacio. How are you doing today?
Fine. Thank you for inviting me to your program, Sebastian.
So, Ignacio, you've had a very interesting and varied career, and I'm very much interested to learn more about how you got started in the UFO subject, because you've been at it for quite a while, and what got you interested in it.
Well, I got interested in the UFOs at the same time with astronomy and astrophysics when I was a child. No, perhaps you must think that I was a weird child. No, when I was 10 or 11, I used to draw maps of Mars. The planet Mars we knew in the 60s. No, because I was born in 1955. So my first interest as a child was in astronomy, astrophysics, and then I discovered the UFO subject, some program in television, but mostly in 1974. I was already 18, 19 years old when I read the Antonio Rivera's book. Antonio Rivera was a pioneer in the UFO subject in Spain. El gran enigma de los platillos volantes, the great mystery of UFOs, of flying saucers, as was called still at that time. And then I met a group of young people of my age, 19 years old, in Santander. A little later, we started in Santander a radio program, one of the first local radio programs on UFOs. And then I joined the CIOBE, the group, one of the pioneer groups in Spain. In fact, it was after CEI, Barcelona's CEI, CIOBE from Santander was the first one starting in the wave of the 60s in Spain, no? The new generation, the second generation of researchers. No? That young generation of people from 17 to 20 years old, no? That they were starting in 1967, 69, studying the field of UFOs. So I joined the second part, well, 76, 77, I joined the CIOBE, and we made a great career, I would say, about the diffusion of the UFO subject from the traditional point of view, the extraterrestrial hypothesis. No, but my that background in astronomy for me was a matter of trying the subject from a scientific point of view. So my first preoccupation was methodology, even in that young age. Soon, with the crisis of the UFO field internationally from 1980, I was going to the humanities and anthropology, and then my focus changed to other aspect of the UFO field. That was UFOs in social history and anthropology, and then I changed from being an ufologist to be an anthropologist of UFOs and extraterrestrials.
Yeah, I think what's very interesting about your research is, and also the age group you fall into, is that what you sketch out in your social history of UFOs in Spain actually is reflected in your own probably way of thinking and in what you experienced. So because in your book, and we're going to get into that later on perhaps, you sketch out these three main episodes in Spanish ufology from the early beginnings in the 1950s, then the formalization of ufology in the 60s, and then the fragmentation. And so it's very interesting to have someone with that breadth of experience and this oversight of what was going on in the community. Did you yourself ever have any sort of close encounter? Did you ever see a UFO, or was it really for you just an academic pursuit to begin with?
No, I never had a sighting or any kind of experience. In fact, in that group, Thiobe, we were quite rational in the way, and I would say a little skeptic, of those people who used to go to the mountain in the weekend and saw a dozen of UFOs in the sky, because of my interest in astronomy, I knew how to interpret certain things in the sky, satellites and artificial satellites, etc. I never had a sighting, a UFO sighting, and my interest, my approach to the subject then went to this other field of interpreting the UFO subject from the culture of the time. This is why in the 80s I studied the social history of ufology and social history of UFO subject in general in Spain. For example, for me, it was very interesting to to research how flying saucers started in Spain. In that time, the dictatorship of Franco was very close to the information in general, so very few things arrived to the press and radio. But that was innocuous. The observations of Kenneth Arnold and those things between 1947 and 1950 were quite innocuous for the dictatorship. So at the beginning, it was very interesting. At the beginning of 1950, we received the news of Keijo's first book of flying saucers. So those phenomena in the skies that were first interpreted as meteorites or whatever, mysterious, then in February and March, they received a new meaning according to the book of Keijo. That was that the Martians were visiting the Earth. And then suddenly, on March 21 of 1950, the first news of sightings of flying saucers, platillos volantes in Spanish, arrived to the press. And then in the next days, a lot of news from everywhere in Spain were being published as a fever, of information.
What was the? Sorry for interrupting, because I think you. It's a very interesting point you mentioned there, because it's very different today. What role did the traditional mass media have in Spain during that period in spreading the news of UFOs and the 1947 wave in the US?
Yeah, it was the role of the media was fundamental to the creation of this new myth of the Martians. Starting with the Martians, we don't know exactly how the radio influenced the public opinion, but we have the press of that time that reflects exactly what was being published or broadcast in radio. Those first news were always under the interpretation of Keijo that was not original to Keijo. In fact, it was an interpretation that was already a myth in the science and philosophy, etc., from centuries ago, but mostly from the end of the 19th century. That the communication with Martians was something of very public interest at the beginning of the 20th century, and then the broadcast emission of wells in the radio that created the panic in New York, supposedly. Well, the Martians were a myth well established, and the media were a fundamental tool for the creation of this myth. Very soon, as soon as we knew that Mars was a desertic planet, in the 50s and early 60s, then the first researchers were evolving their theories to the extraterrestrial, the ET hypothesis. So the origin of flying saucers were further and further to other planets of the solar system, then to other stars, to other galaxies, etc. So the frontier of our knowledge were reflecting what we thought about flying saucers.
Was the original interpretation in the Spanish context, once the 1947 sightings became transmitted through the global media institutions, was it always right from the start? Was the hypothesis that this is Mars, potentially extraterrestrial in origin? Or was there also a hypothesis that this might be secret Russian technology, natural phenomena? Because what I'm really interested in is you start out with a set of interpretive opportunities. So it could be this or it could be that. And then in the course of time, through different actors, it gets cemented into a kind of narrative thread. So if we look at the very beginning, which is a fascinating thing you did, are there different theories in circulation, or was it always in Spain, the extraterrestrial Martian hypothesis?
As we really knew the subject of UFOs at the beginning of the 50s, a little late compared to other countries, even in Latin America and Europe. So we were very influenced by Donald Keijo, that first book, Scully later, very, very, very early or so in 1950. And the press reflected these theories, but also some speculation about the Nazi inventions of flying wings or whatever, or even the Incas that were disappeared in a hidden realm in the mountains where they were thrown flying saucers. Were some weird theories in that time, just to speculate, to give more business to the press. But for us, the Martian flying saucers was the theory that was imposed since the beginning. Just because the period 47 to 50, we knew practically nothing about UFOs, and that speculation about Russians or Soviets were the early theories. No. Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. So you kind of already got a ready-served interpretive package from the US, so to speak, which you then handled in your own context.
We were very exposed to the American information.
And what role did different researchers play in the early 50s in promulgating this this notion in Spain that UFOs are from Mars and potentially extraterrestrial?
Well, there was initially in the 50s, the pioneers of the flying saucer research were very isolated from abroad. No? Eduardo Vuelta in Barcelona, Manuel Pedrajo in Santander, Rey Brea in La Coruña. They were incommunicated among these few 3 or 4 people studying the subject in the 50s, and they knew practically nothing of what was going on France, or France was our main influence at that time because we studied French in the school. It was with Antonio Rivera in 1959 that we opened our eyes to what was going. Was being written in other countries, mostly France. No? Aimé Michel, for example, was a big influence for Antonio Rivera. But Antonio Rivera was a very classic researcher. He believed in the Martian hypothesis initially, but mostly in the ET, the extraterrestrial hypothesis in general. No? With different origins, etc. And it was only with the second generation of young ufologists, already called ufologists in 1970 approximately, that we were open to other views with the influence of Jacques Vallée, for example, with the Passport to Magonia, and others. Mm-hmm.
And so the initial movement, the pioneering movement by Eduardo Vuelta, can you characterize him a bit as a person? Because I think he was quite a notorious character in Spanish ufology, right?
Yeah, Eduardo Vuelta was a personality, bigger than life. No, they say it was a very imaginative researcher, but was a little an ufologist of the old school of the 40s. That people like Adamski, no, who were first esoterists, no, than ufologists. No, also Rey Brea from La Coruña. They believed in theosophy, theosophy's theories, no, quite mystical, no. But Vuelta gave, for the first time, a scientific approach to the subject, and Rey Brea also from La Coruña independently, studying the statistics of the apparition of flying saucers, no, making a statistics by month, and they found a supposed biennial cycle of UFOs that coincided initially in 1950, 52. It seemed that coincided with the opposition of planet Mars. So the connection between the Martian hypothesis and the statistics looked clear. But later, Eduardo Vuelta realized that this was not fulfilled in 1956 and 58, and he abandoned. No? But we were talking about his personality. No, he was he was the first one to receive magazines from abroad, etc. He was the director of the first. He created a first center of studies, no, Centro de Estudios Interplanetarios, the interplanetary studies. No, there was a name very this was in '58, but his personality, he was a little dictator of in that group, no. So the crisis, an internal crisis in 1959-60, finally broke up the Centro de Estudios Interplanetarios, and was then when Antonio Rivera, who spoke French and English, something very important for the internationalization of the subject, came up with the first serious book, because Eduardo Vuelta published in the year '54 a book still in that vein of the theosophical theories about the future evolution of the human race in relation with extraterrestrials. No? But Antonio Rivera was the first one that in 1962 published a book, let's say, with an objective forecast on the subject. No? Mm-hmm.
And did this have so both what Rivera did and then the Center for Interplanetary Studies, did this have a huge impact on the Spanish popular opinion on UFOs, or were the drivers in the media someone else?
I think it was definitely the media that influenced the public opinion, because until that first book of Antonio Rivera had very little influence. It was only in 1966-67 when he published the extended version of that book, El Gran Enigma de los Platillos Volantes, that the subject, this book really got to the main public opinion. But until then, it was the media, no, that was fundamental for this.
What about the role of the church? Because Spain was and potentially still is a very religious country. Did the church have anything to say about this incipient phenomenon in the 1950s?
Well, it's interesting because there was an intervention of religious people, the friars, at that beginning in the years 50s. No? Perhaps because of what I said before, that for the regime, the Franco's regime, the flying saucers was something innocuous, was not something that had nothing to do with religion or ideology. So it was allowed for the priest, no, to opine about the subject, and the opinions were like the international opinion of the Catholic Church and Protestant churches, that the Holy Scriptures, that the Bible said nothing against the possibility that other beings existed in the universe, no? And they were interpreting the scriptures, or they were interpreting the evangelists, no, according to this, no, that there were other ships in the universe. I don't remember exactly how it says, no, but that the Bible was open to the possibility that the redemption was reaching every part of the universe. So, well,
I think it's very interesting to have this historical perspective also on the role of the church, Because I think in a lot of UFO circles, or the common narrative always is that, if UFOs were real and if, in inverted commas, disclosure were to happen, religious systems would completely break down. But as far as I know, the Catholic Church has never claimed that, it would be an ontological inconsistency of having, non-human intelligences around. So it's very interesting. So I think it's a mistake to say that the Catholic Church has always been opposed to the idea of alien entities. But interesting, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, some priests were speculating whether there had been Jesus Christ in other planets, and well, it was allowed to do this. Perhaps like they left this priest a little margin of the mainstream church, no? But well, anyway.
Were miracles ever interpreted in that vein? Because about a year ago, I did an episode on Fatima in Portugal, and obviously, that's still. I think the jury is still out what exactly happened there. But were miracles ever interpreted in Spain in the vein of UFOs, or is that something that has always been kind of seized by the Catholic Church and said, "Hey, this is only a miracle"?
Only in the final 60s, there were some books with the hypothesis that some miracles had something to do with extraterrestrials. But at the end of the 60s, the regime was slightly opening to the international ideas. So it was already allowed already to speak in these terms. No? So it never created. I remember that it never created a crisis in ufology or for the regime. No?
I think the 1950s. So I think now we're kind of the period from the 1950s and then starting with the 1960s, and later on is quite interesting. So we're entering the second period you've sketched out in your book, which is, and I think a fundamental role there can be attributed to contactee movements. I think today you would probably call them experiences, but let's call them contactees. So what happened in Spain during that period?
We have also some our own Adamski. Adamski was the pioneer, at least in fame, no, as the first famous contactee. No? Interestingly, in 1953, the experience of Adamski was published in the press in Spain. And a little later, at the end of 1954, a person was a man, nurse in a hospital in Spain, came up to the press telling a weird story that late in the evening, in the night, walking in the outskirts of Madrid, he encountered a man like the Orton, like the extraterrestrial of Adamski, very similar to Orton, no, with an overall jacket, and who was directly to saying to him. I don't know if there was a word or no. There was just some signs that he was coming from up there, no, and the witness interpreted that he was coming from other planet. But the most interesting of this story is that the supposed extraterrestrial gave a stone to the witness with some signs in it, some simple signs, no, that later were interpreted like a Saturn, a circle, a line, etc. And that was the main subject of talking in a debate in a cafe in Madrid for several years. No, La Ballena Alegre was was that debate. That is the starting point of the mystery Ummo. Maybe you know that Ummo became international fame. No?
Exactly. I think it's fascinating because it's one of those huge UFO contactee movements. I mean, at the moment, I've been doing quite a lot of reading on the 1960s, 1970s. And I think what we fail to understand nowadays from a kind of a fragmented approach in ufology is that what fundamental role these contactee movements had in earlier decades, and UMO is obviously a very big one. But so there was this individual who received the stone from a non-human entity, and what then had these secretive movement meetings in a cafe with other individuals. But what happened then? How did this kick off the Umo story?
My interpretation of that story is that the conversation about the stone, the interpretation, symbolic interpretations of that the leader of those meetings, Fernando Sesma. Fernando Sesma was also a kind of a mystic character and contactee at the same time, no? Who used to go to the outskirts of Madrid to look for signs of the presence of extraterrestrials in the trees, etc. Everything for him was symbolic, no, of something, some intervention. No? My interpretation is that those sometimes funny discussions in the meetings were taken for some clever character to make jokes, no, with Sesma and some of the other naive characters there, no. And the main character in this sense is Jordán Peña. Jordán Peña that played a double role. He presented himself in the meetings as a scientific and skeptic mind, but we later discovered that behind this face was the trickster. No, he was playing with the people. He was obsessed with control of public opinion. He made experiments with people, and maybe those experiments were going out of hand when his telephone calls and his letters and etc. were going being more popular and spread in Spain and after in abroad. No, Jacques Vallée divulged that subject in one of his first book, no? Related to the system of control, etc. Jordán Peña then played that role of the experimenter, or he tried to be an experimenter, but actually the people like me who knew him, we interpret that he was an obsessed person. I mean, obsessed with the control of the opinion of small groups. No, it was finally there was nothing really scientific in his endeavor. No, maybe something psychopathologic, but Of course, this had to be a psychologist to give a professional opinion about this.
No, absolutely. But perhaps just to reiterate, so what Umo did is, or I think Umo claimed to be an alien race, if I understood correctly, right?
Exactly.
At some point in orbit around Earth, and they claimed to communicate with various, partly prominent individuals in Spanish society via both mail and even telephone calls.
By mail. This was the distinctive trait of the Spanish contact in that time. It was that it was a mail contact. People received letters and reports, scientific reports that people like Antonio Rivera, who received several of them, and others, they were not scientists, so they interpreted that the level of scientific literacy of those letters were of enormous importance. There were scientific discoveries there. Well, the people who have studied later the reports say that it was just the level of the what you could read in that time in the scientific magazines in the stands. But Jordan Peña, who was the author of that, recognized by himself years later in 1993 and 94, was a person with many interests. He had a background in psychology, although he was not a psychologist, but at the same time, he was well trained in physical sciences, so it was not difficult for him to make not only pretended scientific reports, but also reports about the utopian Ummo society, the Ummo planet. But an utopian society that when we read it from our time, it looks like an dystopia of of the religious dictatorship of his time.
So, what were the desires expressed in that utopian view? Like, after what kind of social models was it modeled? Was there anything particularly distinctive in it? Or?
It was a scientific utopia, supposedly. Everything was controlled by science and by gadgets. It was the Jordan Peña ideology. I mean, Jordan Peña was also obsessed with gadgets. He was devoted also to parapsychology at the same time. So he played also a double role in this sense, ufologist and parapsychologist. And always working with his gadgets to interpret paranormal phenomena, etc.
Did he have any followers, or was it kind of a formalized, like, quasi-religious group, or was it really just this slightly crazy individual going on this rampage and sending out letters?
This was practically an individual endeavor by himself, but at the beginning he used a person or two people to just for some individual phenomenal. For example, the photographs of San Jose de Valderas. San Jose de Valderas is in the outskirts of Madrid. And in June 1st, 1967, some photographs arrived to the press, photographs of a very, very clear flying saucer, with a sign of like an H, or like a sign of the Cyrillic script in Russian. And those photographs, we knew later, that were prepared with the collaboration of a friend of him. Also to send letters to the ufologists, because all the letters were received by a small group of ufologists or people related with the UFO subject in Madrid, Barcelona, and some other cities, practically Spain, most of them. And these letters were sent, many of them were sent by a girl who was used by Jordan Peña, using a kind of religious sect that he created to manipulate a couple of women. So this is the dark side of Jordan Peña, is this the manipulation of people to his goals. But practically all the time, Ummo was his particular and individual obsession.
Does Umo still have any repercussions on Spanish ufology, or when did it start to go away? You already mentioned that in 1993 he basically owned up to it being a fraud, but are there still people who... Is it still a subject of debate, or has this died down?
Well, it's funny that after Jordan Peña was discovered, and he had to admit and declare that he had been the author of the Ummo subject. It's interesting that with the internet era after 1995, the subject was spreading more than ever, and new people starting researching or publishing or speculating about Ummo. And in the last decade, several books have appeared, with some of them trying to maintain the mystery of no, Jordan Peña was used by some extraterrestrial intelligence or intelligence agency or whatever. No, the speculation is free. And the internet is also host of some web pages with documents and etc. So Ummo, in some way, is livelier than ever. No? When we knew perfectly critical people, we knew that there was nothing beyond Jordan Peña behind Ummo.
Again, what I think is sociologically really fascinating is that this idea of being in contact with non-human intelligences in previous decades was something that had sort of a social momentum behind it. So it was formalized in contactee groups. People would go on a mountain and try to conjure up these entities, much like in the early 20th century, late 19th century with seances and so on. It's just a different manifestation of the same topic. But these days, it's more fragmented. So you have the abduction phenomenon, but it's mainly an individual phenomenon where people, report being in contact with these entities. Often it's a violent encounter. It has nothing really to do with this social aspect of conjuring up entities and being in direct contact with them at will. I think there are a few notable exceptions, like you've probably heard of it as well, the CE5 movement with Stephen Greer in the US, who now claim that they can, through various meditation techniques, get in touch with different entities. But largely, from my opinion, based on what I've read, I think the idea of being in contact with non-human intelligence has largely become an individual phenomenon. And I think this idea of fragmentation is something that now, as we enter the third period in Spanish ufology, is also something that is quite characteristic.
Yeah, in fact, the movement, the contactee movement in Spain, the real contactee movement started in the 70s as internationally as groups who used to make contact through Ouija board or meditation, channeling, etc., receiving messages from higher levels of evolution, etc. No? I studied in my doctorate studies in cultural anthropology. I studied a group Atlan of Madrid, who was the most important and the most influential in the contactee movement in the 80s and 90s. No? I think they were very sincere in their looking for answers, individual and societal answers to the evolution of mankind and individual the evolution of the self. No? But finally, that movement disappeared at the beginning of the 2000s. Perhaps in the wake of the crisis of the UFO subjects and the contactee movement in general, because they said that they had achieved the goals. No, they received messages that completed. I think they are four books with messages from different extraterrestrial guides. Well, it's like a teaching in the personal evolution, and the most important for them is the evolution in the small group, no? As a seed for a new humanity. No? Well, in the last 2 decades, the contactee movement practically has almost disappeared, no? Internationally, and also in Spain. Perhaps we are seeing, yes, in this atomization of ufology. I think ufology is in a crisis that we don't know if it is going to disappear or it will become something else. I said 30 years ago in my first book, Entre ufólogos, creyentes y contactados, among contactees, believers, and ufologists, I said that I was foreseeing the future of ufology. I said that probably ufology was being to disappear in favor of a study in studies in anthropology, sociology, in the sciences, no? Human sciences mostly, and in the other side, the traditional ufology just linked to the to the professional media, etc. But the ufology, as we knew in the 70s, as a social movement of groups of studies publishing small magazines, that was disappearing. And I think 30 years later, this is what we can see. No? In Spain, we have a forum composed by 100 people from different points of view. This is the most interesting, is that this platform, Anomalist, is composed of, for the first time, of people from the old skeptics, the scientific ufology, the media professionals, etc. And for the first time in Spain, there is a dialogue between these different groups. Well, I am the moderator of this platform, so I only can say good things about this. No? But I think ufology is this. Currently, is a debate between different fields that has nothing to do with the old ufology.
Indeed, so this atomization of different researchers with different interests, of people who've been abducted, who haven't been abducted, etc. Do you see anything in this third period that you said started in the 1980s, 1980 up until probably the present? Do you see anything that's particularly Spanish, or is it just that it's kind of the same as in the US? I'm just curious because in doing in reading up on what was happening in Spain, to be honest, I found it quite difficult to find anything at all. I mean, there's also a language barrier and so on, but it's it always is that the situation that ufology has and still is largely defined by currents in the US. And so I'm just wondering if there's anything nowadays distinctly Spanish happening with ufology in your country.
I would say that the Spanish ufology, just to give a name to all this movement, is very in line with the European ufology. But there is, that there is a big split between the American ufology and the European ufology in the last 2 decades. While the Americans have followed their pursuit of the extraterrestrial hypothesis by other means, the Europeans, we have taken advantage of our experience in the subject in a more objective and skeptic view, but also in the human sciences. Well, particularly, I defend the idea that the UFO subject must be studied from anthropology, psychology, etc. And there is a field where I'm interested lately, that is the cognitive science of religion, for example, as an inspiration for what our studies could be. That we could make science in human sciences, more or less. We can try to not only interpret the symbolism of the extraterrestrials in our time, but we can search how we can interpret all the process of the formation of the UFO case, from the perception, the sighting, how the perception is altered by beliefs and experiences and culture where the subject is, and how this goes to the media, etc. And the process of communication is very interesting to the creation of the UFO case. I think all these subjects offer us space to research in the next years. Mm-hmm.
So, since 2017, with the breaking of the New York Times article on UFOs and the Nimitz encounter, etc., the role of government involvement, at least in the US, has taken a very prominent role in ufology and in debates surrounding UFOs. What is there, if at all, is there any opinion in the Spanish ufological community about what the government has to say about UFOs? Is there an official Spanish position by the government on UFOs, or is that something that's lacking?
Well, the person who has the expert in this subject of the official records and the official reports of sightings from the military, aviators, etc., is Vicente Juan Ballester Olmos. He has published a number of papers that he has also in academia.edu, like mine. All these documents are a register of the evolution of the Spanish position, the official Spanish position of the Ministry of Defense and the military. You know that the Spanish declassification of the secret of the UFOs was made at the beginning of the 90s. 1992 was this declaration. In a number of years, practically all official reports and cases have been disclosed, so they are published in internet, etc. And I think the most rational investigators recognize that the Spanish government or the military has no interest already in maintaining any secret or maintaining a research on the UFO subject, because they know that it's irrelevant until now in terms of security. So I don't understand all this mess in the American Congress, etc. The military know that there's nothing that has involved the national security or the security of our skies. No? And then, well, only since the years 90s, only a small sector of ufologists and journalists, professional journalists, have made a mess of trying to the conspiracy obsessions of some people maintain that there are still secrets, that they are colliding with Ballester Olmos or the ufologists or whatever to maintain a secret, or the manipulation of the UFO cases. Well, all this is an absurd. Really, the Spanish position is quite open in that moment.
No, I agree. I mean, secrets sell well in the press, and everyone likes a good secret. So I think that plays a big role in these conspiracy theories. But is the Spanish military saying, okay, there's no national security aspect to it, so we're not investigating it actively? I can kind of understand that. But are they at the same time saying that, okay, we have anomalous things happening, but yeah, they're just not really of interest? Is that a fair characterization, or are they even saying, look, there's nothing to see here, there's no anomalies in we can detect?
Well, a couple of people who studied objectively this subject, they realized Ballester Olmos is the first one, but John Plana is another expert in the matter, and they realized that if we could say something about what military knew about the UFOs, was that they knew less than the ufologists, no? And they had to ask sometime what the ufologists knew about that case, or what was the interpretation of that. This collaboration between Ballester Olmos and the military created in that time, in the 90s, all speculations of manipulation. No? But well, I think there is nothing of that sort. No? What we know is that the military knew absolutely nothing about the UFO subject, and this is why several cases they are still not interpreted, not explained, no, because there is little information, or there are conflicting hypotheses, no.
Yeah, and I think it's also, kind of what came first, the chicken or the egg kind of thing, because if there's no national security aspect to the data, the military has absolutely no interest in engaging with it. And so it's, the entire question of, oh, why are they not engaging with it? Well, because they're not studying it is kind of a bit tautological. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But yeah, very, very interesting. So to come to a conclusion, then where do you see personally? You've seen a lot of things, you've had a lot of experience in the field. Where do you see ufology heading? You've already alluded to that your hypothesis 30 years ago that UFO research becomes more and more fragmented, the community becomes more atomized, has turned out to be true. Where do you see the next 5 to 10 years heading, especially with what's going on in the US?
In the US, well, in the US is difficult. I would like to do a field research as a cultural anthropologist with ufologists, no, to know exactly what's the mentality of those, still in the 70s, the groups like MUFON or CUFOs were represented a quite rational point of view. But in the last times, there is as I said, a split between the objective and scientific ufology and those clubs and people like those influencing the Arrow subject, that people who were behind the curtains to trying to manipulate the conclusions of the official study. I don't think, perhaps related that with the idea that the United States is a very religious country. This is something very strange for a democratic country, that there is no religious crisis in the United States. And I think this religious idea permeates the field of UFOs. They look for something with power and ever, how to say, it's a religious idea. The UFOs represent for them in some way a religious idea linked with their ideologies. I think this different evolution in Europe lead us to a different future. As I said, the difference between 30 years ago and now, and in another 30 years, I think ufology is going to disappear as a serious camp of studies. There will be, as I said, anthropologists, sociologists, etc., of the UFO beliefs of the 20th century, and like spiritualism, something equivalent. Spiritualism was very influential at the end of the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century. Came in crisis in the 20s and 30s. It's almost the same, one century of difference. The evolution is similar to that of ufology. And then in the 30s, that people starting the spiritualists started the contactee movement. They came from spiritualism. So the ufologists 30 years on, maybe they will start a new movement of spirituality of other way. You know that UFOs have been always in the threshold of our knowledge. They were in Mars when our knowledge was in Mars, then in the stars. Maybe in the future there will be in the mind, or the threshold will be in the artificial intelligence. And there will be a mystery. There will not be a UFOs or maybe yes, but we don't know.
Yeah, I'm very glad. I'm very glad you mentioned this. I think it's absolutely true and fascinating at the same time that what we're seeing is kind of this way of human society is trying to grapple with the age-old debate of how does materiality and consciousness intersect, and it is a big mystery, and it has taken different facets from fairy folklore to UFOs, and so only time will tell what other kind of cultural guises this exploration will take place. However, I would say that even though we're entering probably an era where digitization and artificial intelligence plays an ever increasing role, the physical aspect of this enigma will still play a role to a certain extent, because I think this has always been the tension in ufology up to the present day. There is a perceived material aspect of it. People study debris. There are entire books on crash retrieval operations. But at the same time, there is this spiritualist idea that it's, space brothers living on the outskirts of human knowledge. And so I think that if we look into the future, as my personal opinion, I think we will still have remnants of some sort of material mystery, but this idea that human consciousness and artificial intelligence, they will become more and more prominent. So that's at least my forecast. So
yeah, definitely. I agree with that.
Perfect. Well, it's been absolutely fascinating. Thanks a lot for taking the time today to give us an insight into a very fascinating social history of UFOs in Spain. Where can people find your work?
I have two books published in 1993 and 2002. These are Entre ufólogos, creyentes y contactados. This was the social history of UFOs in Spain that I put already in academia.edu. And another book that is OVNIs y Ciencias Humanas, UFOs and Human Sciences. Those are in academia. Just write in Ignacio Cabria Academia, you find it there. And I published in the last years two other books different. That is the cultural history of UFOs in Spain. That is a broader view from my first book. And the second is Así creamos monstruos. How we create monsters. That where I dealt with another close subject, that is the creation of the legends of monsters, from the monster of Loch Ness to Yeti, etc. No, this is also cultural history and anthropology that I find very related to the creation of the UFO subject also.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll put a link to your academia page in the description of this episode, and and is there also a link to the group you mentioned where you are involved as in a managerial role? You mentioned
the forum anomalies is a closed group by invitation. It's a group in Spanish. But there are people also from Brazil, Portugal, and Italy participating. It's a forum in Spanish, but people who can read in Spanish also can participate. And well, if there are listeners who can read Spanish, we'll be open to their participation also.
Perfect. Great, Ignacio. Thanks a lot for your time today, and would be great to have you on the show again at some point. Have a lovely Saturday.
It was my pleasure to participate.
Thanks. Bye-bye.